Good morning. Welcome to NewsWire here on SportsGrid. It is Masters Day here on SportsGrid as well. This is NewsWire. We have that story covered for you, although a little bit of a delay at the Masters because of weather issues. We'll get to that in just a few minutes here on the show. Kyle Irving will join us on the program. We'll go over everything going on in the National Basketball Association and the latest in college basketball with some coaching shakeup as well. Jim Gazzale is with us from Legal Sports Report, and then we have Rick Haro on site at Augusta. Brady Kannon in Las Vegas for an updated look at the leaderboard at the Masters, as well as some potential futures bets for the weekend, because naturally there's going to be later tee-offs. So still time to get in wagers if indeed that's what you choose. But a bombshell of a story has just come out this morning. In fact, only 30 minutes ago, O.J. Simpson, of course, former National Football League player, but most known for the trial that he was involved in for being accused of murdering his former wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, as well as her friend Ronald Goldman, inevitably found not guilty in the trial of the century, people had called it, then went on to be found guilty in a civil trial, went to prison for a Las Vegas arrest. O.J. Simpson has died at the age of 76 years old. His family said that he was surrounded by his children and grandchildren in a social media post that came out about 30 minutes ago. No question, that event, going back to 1994, the chase in the Ford Bronco from the police with O.J. Simpson. Probably the most notorious, unfortunate, and event of my lifetime that I can honestly remember where I was. I think most people remember where they were at the time, breaking in to the NBA Finals for that Ford Bronco chase. Just a crazy time that didn't involve social media, sort of pre-internet and everything else. Everybody was locked into their televisions during that time. Naturally, O.J. Simpson died, by the way, of cancer, his family says, at the age of 76 years old. So indeed, that is the top story of the day here on NewsWire. Okay, now let's get to some other news, which we thought would be our top story, but not so much. Shohei Ohtani's interpreter, Ipe, is in negotiations to plead guilty for his involvement with a offshore sports betting book. It does appear that the investigation that has been done shows that Ohtani himself not culpable with the issues that surround his interpreter, who is being accused of fraud. We'll see what ends up happening if he does plead guilty. Of course, this interpreter is in a world of trouble with millions of dollars being sent to an illegal sports book. Now, speaking of stories that definitely have found some legs over the last month, Jontay Porter could face a potential permanent ban from the National Basketball Association, as NBA Commissioner Adam Silver said Wednesday. He's under investigation from the league following multiple instances of betting irregularities over the last few months. And he could be banned permanently if he is accused that it is true, only if, calling it a cardinal sin. Suspicions arose from prop bets involving Porter for games on January the 26th and March 20th in a story first reported by ESPN. Prop bets specifically linked to Porter around those dates wound up being big money makers, according to the DraftKings Sportsbook. Stay tuned for this story as well. Also, with a new head coach heading to Arkansas in John Calipari and a potential replacement in Kentucky, one of those possibilities was said to be Scott Drew. No longer the case. This morning, it is now being reported that Drew will remain at Baylor and has passed on the offer from Kentucky. And this is a social media post that just came out about 10 minutes ago. So we're trying to get the details here. But naturally, Scott Drew remains at Baylor. Kentucky still looking for a new head coach. Okay, A-Rod and Mark Lore, the future or past or potential owners of the Minnesota Timberwolves, eyed some payroll cuts. How about this? Coming from a potential purchase of the Minnesota Timberwolves. They submitted financial projections forecasting a sizable retreat in roster payroll that Glenn Taylor, the majority owner, believed would jeopardize the franchise's ability to compete for a title. And Taylor pulled back the sale. So now it makes some sense as to why this ended up happening. Naturally, Lore would have been the control person of the Minnesota Timberwolves. A-Rod's involvement remained to be seen. Drew Holiday and the Boston Celtics have agreed on a 4-year, $135 million contract extension. He declined, get this, a player option of $37 million for 2024-25. He gets a long-term deal and now stays with the Celtics long-term. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Porzingis, Derek White, Holiday. That is the core. He's the fourth player to sign a guaranteed deal worth more than $100 million at 33 years or older. All right, we got injury news updates on Giannis. It looks like Giannis could potentially be back for the beginning of the playoffs, but there's no question, based on this report, that he's going to miss a couple of games at least. 3 games of the regular season. He underwent an MRI that confirmed the diagnosis of a calf strain. So he's not going to play the regular season and then will be reevaluated for the Milwaukee Bucks playoffs. So essentially good news coming from them. Also, another rematch in the NBA playoffs is well coming. The Dallas Mavericks and LA Clippers are going to face off again in the first round of the playoffs. It's the third time in 5 years the NBA playoffs begin on April the 20th. The debut of Jackson Holiday yesterday picks up his first career run batted in, wore number 7. Billy Ripken wore 7. Cal Ripken Sr. wore number 7. Congratulations at 20 years old to Jackson Holiday making his debut. The Orioles ended up winning that game as well. Kansas City Royals have won 6 games in a row, folks. They're the hottest team in Major League Baseball. How about that? Good start for them this season. Unfortunately for the White Sox, their poor start got a little bit worse. Yoan Moncada was placed on the injured list with an adductor strain. He is going to miss a minimum of 2 months. And Oscar Colas was called up to take his place on the roster. Meanwhile, Max Scherzer says he is ahead of schedule, wants to return for the Texas Rangers. He had back surgery 4 months ago. He's expected to throw live batting practice coming up next week. Now, as far as the Masters are concerned, we were planning on doing leaderboard for you here on the show, but they just teed off about 30 minutes ago. They were delayed 2 hours because of rain and wind over at Augusta. And parking lots also didn't open on time. Neither did the gates. But, of course, Masters now underway. We'll update this for you coming up in about 20 minutes from now. Ricky Fowler, meanwhile, won the par 3 contest, in case you missed that yesterday, after a 3-year absence from the Masters. And we also got news that Rashee Rice, the wide receiver on the Kansas City Chiefs, is facing 8 charges from that car crash that happened in Dallas a couple of weeks ago. Arrest warrants issued for Rice. 23 years old, 1 count of aggravated assault, 1 count of collision involving serious bodily injury, 6 counts of collision involving injury, and 1 extension, or you would call it a rework of a contract in the NFL. Running back for the Cleveland Browns, Nick Chubb, lowered his base salary of $11.775 million. He's expected to return to the Browns this upcoming season, but naturally a very serious injury that could keep him out for the beginning of the NFL season. And that is the latest going on in all sports in the National Football League and beyond. Coming up next, we touch on some college hoops. John Calipari's headed to Arkansas. What's the latest in the NBA? We'll preview some games tonight. Kyle Irving of Sporting News joins us next here on NewsWire. We'll be right back.
If you passed him up as a Heisman Trophy winner and he lights the league on fire like C.J. Stroud over a Bryce Young, you might not make it as a head coach or in your regime here. I just don't think they can pass over Daniels at number 2.
He's sitting at 5.8 goals, saved above average. He has been standing on top of his head for this team, but defense has to help him out a little bit. The Red Wings defense comes alive just a bit. I think that they're definitely going to punch their card.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Victor Hovland right now can probably hit it right where he's looking on the range. But the problem is when you get out to a golf course, especially like Augusta National, it's a big, big picture. You can see every shot in the world, but the targets are really, really small.
I feel like whoever we pick is going to win. Like, I feel like we have the power to choose the winner of this tournament.
I know. I'm surprised more guys haven't reached out.
And they might, and they probably will.
Only on SportsGrid.
89-87, 0.6 seconds remaining. Big drama here in this game. Always frustrating when your Final Four parlay and bracket gets busted, but here we go. I'm done.
Look what he is now. He's on FanDuel, plus 120. almost even money to win the tournament. So you actually, if you did get him at plus 260, you got a pretty good, better investment than you had before. Just saying.
Sports Rage Late Night, only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Welcome back to NewsWire here on SportsGrid. Lots happening in college basketball, even with the season being over. And, of course, we're approaching the NBA playoffs. So let's bring in Kyle Irving to get the very latest. Kyle, thanks for coming on the show. John Calipari stealing some of the spotlight there, had that press conference yesterday, taking over at Arkansas. I don't think I've ever heard a coach say that we have no team. That's the first time I think I've ever seen or heard that at a press conference. I don't even know what that means. I mean, does that mean every player from the Hogs is gone and he's got to completely build a new team there? I mean, you're telling me like no kids are coming back? 1, 2, 3? But let's dive in here. Your thoughts on him going to Arkansas, and then we got some updated news here on a potential Kentucky replacement who's decided to stay at home.
Yeah, I mean, right off the bat, that was the biggest takeaway from Calipari's first press conference with Arkansas. He said, we have no team, and that is not an exaggeration. Every single player that was on Arkansas's roster last year that still has college eligibility remaining is either in the transfer portal or has already declared for the NBA draft. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't go back to Arkansas and Calipari can't try and, lure them back to the Razorbacks. But, a lot of times these guys enter the transfer portal to try and find a new situation, and they don't return to where they came from. So, Calipari is going to have to build this thing from scratch through the transfer portal. I want to remind people that in 2009, when he left Memphis to take the Kentucky job, he took DeMarcus Cousins and John Wall with him, two of the best recruits that he had during his entire time at Kentucky. And you're already starting to see some of the players that he recruited in that number 2 ranked 2024 recruiting class to Kentucky are starting to decommit. Jaden Quaintance is a top 10 prospect and a 5-star prospect, one of the best players in the country coming into college basketball next year. He has already decommitted. It would be interesting if he follows Calipari to Arkansas. Another name I'm monitoring, 5-star prospect, Carter Knox, is the brother of Kevin Knox, who played for Calipari at Kentucky and turned into a top 10 pick in the NBA draft. So, it wouldn't surprise me if some of these players start following Calipari over to Fayetteville, but there's other players on that Kentucky roster who could join him as well. So it's going to be an interesting situation to see if Cal can get some of his recruits to follow him to Arkansas and then maybe pluck some of the players from the remaining Kentucky roster while they try and figure out who their next head coach is.
Yeah, and there's a report this morning that a potential replacement for Calipari has dropped out. And so where do the Wildcats go from here?
Yeah, that's, the big question. It felt like Scott Drew was the person who was going to be the guy to step in and fill for John Calipari, and that fit made sense. Some other names that I've seen brought up, friend of the show, Mike DeCourcy, who, you can trust as much as anybody in college basketball. He's mentioned BYU's Mark Pope because he's someone that won a national championship at Kentucky. He has a rapport there. He mentioned Xavier Sean Miller, who has, very high level experience at Arizona, bringing in some top tier recruits the same way that Calipari did. Another coach that he had mentioned is a potential reunion with Rick Pitino, which would be an interesting draw as well. I don't know how likely it is that those three names are where they rank on Kentucky's list of next head coaches. I know Billy Donovan, the head coach of the Chicago Bulls, who won back-to-back championships with the Florida Gators, is another name that's been brought up. But, I'm sure Kentucky wants to get this process on the road, especially with, the transfer portal closing on May 1st. And Billy Donovan's team is fighting in the play-in tournament right now. They could potentially make the NBA playoffs. So that might be, a hire that has to wait for them to kind of talk to him and see if, he would be interested in taking that job in the first place. And I feel like Kentucky might want to move a little bit more swiftly than that.
Okay. Well, this is going to be a story we'll be following, and I would imagine you're right. Kentucky's not going to wait 2 weeks to find a coach. This has to happen soon. Okay, I got to say, Kyle, this was bad news seeing this yesterday for Jontay Porter, for Adam Silver to address this directly. And I suppose he was asked the question, and again, fair enough, he's going to answer it. But indeed, threw out some pretty dramatic comments here saying that if indeed they find that Porter was, which we're saying right now is allegedly, involved with a couple of his props, either tanking them or doing something to make money for either himself or other people involved in sports betting, he would face a lifetime ban. So again, this is not us jumping to conclusions at this point, Kyle. This is the commissioner talking about this as well.
Yeah, I think the thing that's interesting about the Jontay Porter situation, you mentioned before you had me on here that, he was like on DraftKings, they had him as the most volume bet on player and the most volume in terms of money bet on player for a couple nights in the NBA. So obviously that raised some red flags. And, allegedly they're saying that he bet on his unders, and in a couple of those games, he left games early with illnesses and a headache, kind of some things that also raised some red flags. So, if he is guilty of this, unfortunately for Jontay Porter, I do think that the NBA is going to make an example of him and make a loud and clear statement that this is not something that will be tolerated whatsoever. Adam Silver threw out the idea that he could be, banned from the NBA. And, I don't think that that's a far-fetched thing to think at all, given the severity of this situation.
Yeah. I mean, Happy Gilmore involved too. I mean, my gosh, we got everybody involved.
May as well.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So Giannis, good news for him, I think. Now, again, this is injury reporting. So to say that we know for sure would be foolish. But Giannis going to miss regular season time. They're saying not postseason time with this strain that he has. So, Kyle, if indeed this is the case, Giannis has proven to be sort of superhuman when it comes to injuries, coming back pretty quickly. And if we get a repeat of that, I think the Bucks will be fine. I guess the question I would ask you is if he misses a playoff game, or if he's not 100% in a playoff game or two, could this cost the Bucks the first round?
I think we're looking at a similar situation that we saw last year. He came into the playoffs nursing a back injury, and they drew a tough first round matchup with the Miami Heat, a team that is not afraid of anybody, no matter if they're a play-in team or whatever the situation is. They feel like if they're healthy, they can beat anybody. And, Giannis tried to play through that back injury, and the Heat ended up knocking him out in the first round. And unfortunately for the Bucks, they're kind of in a similar situation this year where they're only a win away from locking up that number 2 seed. And that could end up being a kiss of death because you have the Miami Heat and the Philadelphia 76ers with Joel Embiid, who has been awesome since he's returned from that knee injury, sitting in that play-in tournament range, looking to claim the number 7 and 8 seeds. So, calf injuries are tricky. Even once you get back, it's, a high frequency that you could re-injure that same calf. So, he's only got, from the time that he injured his calf on Monday night, he only has, roughly 2 weeks to get healthy before the start of the NBA playoffs. And, it's kind of a long shot to think that he might be available for game 1. So it's not crazy to think that he could miss some time in the NBA playoffs. And, for teams as good as Miami and Philly, when Joel Embiid is healthy, that might be all they need to get a leg up in the competition.
Yeah. Let's quickly hit on Jrue Holiday's extension, 4 years, $135 million. Celtics are trying to keep this core around for years, Kyle.
Yeah, the Jrue Holiday extension is another interesting story out of the NBA yesterday. Like you said, Celtics trying to keep this championship window open. After signing Jrue Holiday to an extension, they now have Kristaps Porzingis under contract till 2026, Jaylen Brown under contract till 2029, Jrue Holiday till 2028, and then they're going to sign Jason Tatum to a supermax extension that is rumored to be over $338 million this offseason. That would take him through 2030. So the Boston Celtics are locking up and committing to this championship core. The only player out of the team that they have right now that hasn't signed an extension is Derek White, and he could look into an extension this offseason as well. They have his bird rights, so they are able to dip into the salary cap to pay him whatever he wants as long as they are willing to keep him there and pay the luxury tax. And we've seen it with the Golden State Warriors in the past. If you feel like you have a championship contender and the owners are willing to spend the money, they will do whatever it takes to keep that roster together and continue to compete for championships.
All right, let's move ahead to the most competitive game potentially of the night, an important one. New Orleans, Sacramento. Let's touch on this game. Kings are a 1-point favorite, more or less a pick'em game, total of 217. New Orleans is in the 6th spot. They need to win tonight or they could be in the play-in, but the odds makers are telling us that's no sure thing, Kyle.
Yeah, I mean, the Sacramento Kings are trying to avoid being a lock for the play-in tournament. If they were to lose tonight, they would be locked into the play-in tournament. New Orleans Pelicans have actually gotten them 4 times this year, including the in-season tournament. They say it's tough to beat a team 3 times. It might be even harder to beat a team 5 times in a season. I actually like Sacramento to get the job done tonight and keep their playoff hopes alive for, just another day.
All right, Kyle, thanks again for coming on. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back with Jim Gazzale from Legal Sports Report.
Boy, if you passed him up as a Heisman Trophy winner and he lights the league on fire like C.J. Stroud over a Bryce Young, you might not make it as a head coach or in your regime here. I just don't think they can pass over Daniels at number 2.
He's sitting at 5.8 goals saved above average. He has been standing on top of his head for this team, but defense has to help him out a little bit. The Red Wings defense comes alive just a bit. I think that they're definitely going to punch their card.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Victor Hovland right now can probably hit it right where he's looking on the range. But the problem is when you get out to a golf course, especially like Augusta National, it's a big, big picture. You can see every shot in the world, but the targets are really, really small.
I feel like whoever we pick is going to win. I feel like we have the power to choose the winner of this tournament.
I know. I'm surprised more guys haven't reached out.
And they might, and they probably will.
Only on SportsGrid.
89-87, 0.6 seconds remaining. Big drama here in this game. Always frustrating when your Final Four parlay and bracket gets busted, but here we go. I'm done.
Look what he is now. He's on FanDuel, plus 120. Almost even money to win the tournament. So you actually, if you did get him at plus 260, you got a pretty good, better investment than you had before. Just saying.
Sports Rage Late Night, only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Welcome back to NewsWire here on SportsGrid. Jim Gazzale is with us from Legal Sports Report. We're going to touch on some updated stories in the state of Maryland. Of course, maybe a horse racing story or two. Jim is with us once again, Jim, as we're getting ready. It's springtime here. We got the Masters going on, of course, in Augusta this weekend, and plenty of sports betting stories to dive into as well. Thanks again for appearing on the show once again this week. How are you?
Yeah, good. We're double dipping this week, Craig.
Yeah, 2 times this week. Got to pay overtime, Jim. Thanks for the appearance. Okay, let's hit on Maryland. We got 2 stories to touch on here. The first one involves a very popular topic for the future for sports, which is the legalization of sports betting that includes iGaming. What is the latest in Maryland there?
Yeah, it's been a busy couple of days in Maryland, so this will be a crab cake heavy segment for you, Craig. Online casino gaming not legalized as they wrapped up the legislative session in Maryland on Monday. There was some hope and optimism going into the session this year that Maryland would legalize online casino. However, that did not come to fruition in 2024. The next chance, they tell me, is 2026. And the reason for that is because the legislation requires a constitutional amendment and a referendum sent to the voters, and they need a statewide election year for that to happen. So because the legislation required that referendum, they had hoped, at least late last week, that there might be a chance to just vote on putting that referendum on the November ballot for voters, but that also did not come to pass. I spoke with Senator Watson in Maryland on Monday, and he told me that there were 2 main hurdles that he identified in his Senate chamber with the bill that some of his colleagues just couldn't get around. And one was problem gambling, and the other was some concerns over the cannibalization of the brick and mortar casinos in Maryland. He pointed to sports betting as being relatively young there in Maryland, a little more than a year old that market is. And he said that they're still gathering a lot of data. There's still plenty of additional data to come in around problem gaming when it comes to sports betting that they'll rely on and lean on and research and analyze to get a better grasp on how to navigate some problem gaming issues within this online casino bill. So the next steps for this legislation, like I said, next best chance is 2026. That amendment needs to be in front of the voters on the ballot in a statewide election. So we will see how that progresses. But like I said, 2026 is the next time that online casino legislation will probably surface in Maryland. Senator Watson did tell me, too, that he felt like they had a good bill this year. So it shouldn't be such a heavy lift the next time that these conversations start to pick up.
And our stories continue in Maryland, Jim, with the idea that sports betting is bringing in some very big numbers in the month of March correlated to the NCAA tournament. Looking at some figures here, Jim, seems to me over $80 million is a pretty good month.
Yeah, $83.7 million bet on college basketball in Maryland in March. And, of course, that includes the NCAA tournament, the NIT, and, whatever other various, college basketball tournaments that are happening. But yeah, a pretty solid number. It was 15% of overall handle in the month, which, going back and looking at some prior months during, the regular season, the conference season of college basketball, it's usually around 6 or 7% of handle. So, about twice the percentage of that overall handle mark. Overall handle in March in Maryland, $536.7 million, with, like I said, a sizable chunk coming from college basketball betting. Parlays, on the other hand, Craig, like we've talked about plenty of times, made up 2/3 of operator revenue, $30.5 million in revenue for Maryland sports books off of parlays. The sports books there cleared about $45 million in all. So, 2/3 of that revenue generated by parlays. ESPN Bet, which we've been tracking kind of closely here since their launch in November. They're getting into 5-6 months of action. They're holding steady in fourth place there in Maryland. But yeah, overall that March Madness number, like we talked about earlier in the week, Craig, in New York, just driving big handle figures for sports books in a variety of different markets. And, of course, there's only a handful of regulated sports betting markets in the U.S. that provide, specific sport by sport data. So it's always interesting to kind of get our eyes on some of this. I know, Colorado should be coming out fairly soon with their figures, and we'll get a sense of that as well from them.
And as we close out news on the state, I guess the biggest question here is not the fact that the Preakness Stakes looks like it will continue in Maryland. I guess the question for you, Jim, is do you see it continuing at Pimlico or somewhere else? I know when we talked earlier in the week, somewhere else seemed to be the predominant theme here. Is that still the case?
Yeah, so the Preakness will be held at Laurel Park, also in Maryland, just 1 year in 2026. And I spoke to some people that were involved in the writing of the legislation around the future of Maryland racing and redeveloping Pimlico and kind of tearing it down and rebuilding it. And I picked up on some interesting themes from this conversation. One was that in the past, the horse racing industry in Maryland has kind of missed or passed on the opportunity to get their hands on some expanded gambling options when they legalized slot machines in Maryland back in 2012. The company that owned Pimlico and Laurel Park, they didn't submit an application. They didn't want it. And then, a bunch of sort of fiscal and financial issues started to arise when these properties started to be in need of a facelift and some repairs. They also had the opportunity to put a brick and mortar retail sports book at one of their properties, and they declined to do that, saying that the $1 million licensing fee was a bit too steep, given that the vast majority, like we see everywhere else, in sports betting revenue is coming from online sources. Part of the legislation that was just passed on Monday evening eliminates that $1 million licensing fee for a retail sports book at Pimlico during this redevelopment process. Now, they didn't tell me specifically that they will be building one in there, but they did tell me that it becomes a bit more palatable now to build that retail sports book into the construction plans without the that added $1 million cost of the license. Now, the state is forking over about $400 million in bonds to help redevelop Pimlico. So I would venture a pretty strong guess that it'll be strongly considered adding a retail sports book at Pimlico. One other interesting thing that they told me too is the available seating. The seats is only going to be a couple of thousand, and it's a similar theme with the Belmont Park redevelopment plan that's going on in New York right now. They're tearing down a massive clubhouse and grandstand that had seating for over 80,000 people, and they're reducing it to about 7,000 to 10,000 people. So, like we've seen in sports betting, Craig, everything is happening online. You're at a game, right? A lot of these stadiums now have sports books or sort of sports betting lounges where most of the people are likely betting on their phones. The same thing happens at racetracks. I was at the track in New York City on Saturday, and there's plenty of terminals to go and place your bet, but I'm sitting there placing the bet on my phone because it's more convenient. So a lot of these horse betting facilities that are getting government funding to be redeveloped, they're focused on that redevelopment with the eyes towards a lot of this stuff is happening online. We don't need these massive facilities anymore. They're turning more into sort of entertainment venues rather than gambling venues. And that is certainly turning up in the blueprints and the construction plans for these facilities.
Yeah, and interesting that these facilities, certainly are making big decisions in Maryland, the future of horse racing, sports betting. Who knows? Kiosks, a lot involved there, Jim. Great updates here from that state. I'm sure Maryland appreciates it here on the show. Thanks again for coming on NewsWire. We'll see you again next week. Thanks for coming on.
All right. Thanks, Greg.
All right, coming up next, the weather has wreaked havoc in Augusta, causing a delay at the Masters. The sports professor Rick Horrow will join us next to tell us exactly what is going on there, and then Brady Kannon will tell us whether or not we need to make some adjustments on our sports wagers with the Masters being delayed because of weather. But they are underway right now at Augusta. We'll give you a live leaderboard as well. You're watching NewsWire on SportsGrid exclusively every day, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern. We'll be right back.
Boy, if you passed him up as a Heisman Trophy winner and he lights the league on fire like C.J. Stroud over a Bryce Young, you might not make it as a head coach or in your regime here. I just don't think they can pass over Daniels at number 2.
He's sitting at 5.8 goals saved above average. He has been standing on top of his head for this team, but defense has to help him out a little bit. The Red Wings defense comes alive just a bit. I think that they're definitely going to punch their card.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Victor Hovland right now can probably hit it right where he's looking on the range. But the problem is when you get out to a golf course, especially like Augusta National, it's a big, big picture. You can see every shot in the world, but the targets are really, really small.
I feel like whoever we pick is going to win. Like, I feel like we have the power to choose the winner of this tournament.
I know. I'm surprised more guys haven't reached out.
And they might, and they probably will.
Only on SportsGrid.
89-87, 0.6 seconds remaining. Big drama here in this game. Always frustrating when your Final Four parlay and bracket gets busted, but here we go. I'm done.
Look what he is now. He's on FanDuel, plus 120. Almost even money to win the tournament. So you actually, if you did get him at plus 260, you got a pretty good, better investment than you had before. Just saying.
Sports Rage Late Night, only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Welcome back to NewsWire. As they have teed off at Augusta, several players are through 1 or 2, so not much of a leaderboard, but we will get into it with Brady Kannon coming up in a few minutes. But first, let's go live to Augusta National, where the sports professor Rick Horrow is in place to tell us more about why the Masters was delayed this morning. Rick, highly unusual for this to happen this time of the year at Augusta. Not completely unprecedented, but the good news is, I guess, the action has begun.
When I was there yesterday, everybody was ready to bundle up the animals and pair them 2 by 2 in the ark. But Fred Ridley, the chairman of Augusta National, who's a friend, said it ain't happening and blew the storms away, overly dramatic. But today, everybody thought about a 2:30 p.m. start. It was actually 10:30. The gates open at 9:30. The Watson Nicholas player honorary starting 10:10. Gary Player, shameless plug, on the record show this week. It drops. Everybody ought to watch it. A great interview with me and Gary. 167 wins, and he meant every inch of his drive today, out driving Jack, although that's not hard to do these days. And then 10:30, they really start. 1 o'clock, some of the Murderers Row play. The 2 times to watch this afternoon, Tiger, 354, Sunset, 756. Tiger, you'll talk about it with Brady, will not finish today, but he's a hell of a lot better position than we thought a few hours ago when they thought he would have to play a number of 36 holes tomorrow, walking. That's not good for his body. Maybe he gets better off because he'll play 14 or 15 holes today, finish up tomorrow, and then go to round 2.
Yeah, no, that's good news because, again, Tiger moves the needle, Rick, still at this stage of his career. And from a business perspective, I know that this is what people still want to see, the legends performing at a high level.
Let me tell you something, Craig. $18 million in prize money, $3.2 million for first place. None of the players care a lot about that relative to winning their Masters. A lot of storylines, Fred Ridley says. First of all, at his press conference, Augusta National, Augusta Municipal getting an overhaul next year. It's another PGA improvement with first tee, and the Masters Committee getting right in the middle of it. Sean McManus, chairman of CBS Sports, last tournament. He retires next week. Let's remember his father. You remember him, Jim McKay. He called the first Masters in 1956 when I was 1 year old, and I remember for the next 10 years until my dad died, religiously watching, and I know everybody in America feels the same way about the Masters family ties. But economically, $5 billion impact of golf in Georgia, 5th largest impact of any state. Masters itself, about $100 million to $120 each year. Economically inside Augusta and the Masters, they don't tell you this, but I've been checking. It's about $3.6 million in merchandise these 4 days. It's about $16,000 a second. And I personally contributed to that. I looked at the amount spent yesterday. It ain't pretty.
All right. Well, Rick, thanks again for coming on NewsWire. Thanks for the updates on the economics and the weather as well. Enjoy your weekend there, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely, my friend.
All right. Rick Horrow, the sports professor, with an update. They are off and running at Augusta. So Brady Kannon, when he woke up this morning, thought, all right, let me take a look at my card and see how I'm doing and see how my players are playing. And then he realized he had a couple of more hours to spare, Brady, because a lot of the updates have sort of been delayed at this point. A lot of the major players are going off later this afternoon. And I guess let's start with the weather. Has that affected any of your thinking with any of your previous wagers or any of your future wagers?
I was actually pleasantly surprised by how this has worked out this morning, Craig. It looks like all the players are going to experience a relatively even playing field. Last night, looking at the weather, it looked like this delay might be much more severe. You had electricity in the air. Lightning will obviously stop a golf tournament on a dime. And it looked like they could possibly have thunder showers with lightning for about 5 or 6 hours today, but apparently that has dissipated. Obviously getting started at 10:30 Eastern time. They are in action now. I thought they might not start until, after 12:30, 1 o'clock Eastern time or something like that. And that was really going to impact the tournament and might also really impact the draw. But I think this has worked out almost perfectly because they didn't tee off at 8 a.m. Eastern and guys were really susceptible to a lot of rain and wind early. They've delayed that now. It's still windy conditions out there, but I think for the most part, everybody is going to experience similar conditions today, cloudy and windy. Wind in, anywhere from 10 to probably 20 plus miles an hour. And I think the entire field is going to experience that. The way I was able to kind of figure it out, and Rick noted there that sunset is at 7:56, so they'll be able to play until about 8 p.m. Eastern time. And by my estimation, that will leave about 8 to 10 groups unfinished in round one, and they'll have to go back out on Friday morning. Friday morning, you've got light winds early. I'm guessing they'll start them extra early on Friday morning, maybe 6 a.m., maybe 6:30, something like that. Those guys will probably only have to finish up 3 or 4 holes. So for 3 or 4 holes, they might catch a little break without much wind. But then about 10 a.m., that wind goes right back up to 15, 20 plus miles an hour through the afternoon. So again, I think this has actually probably worked out really well from the standpoint that we're not going to get a weather bias where certain players that are at a decided disadvantage and others are at a decided advantage. I think the way it's worked out is probably a best case scenario given the weather situation that we were thinking about on Wednesday. I think everybody's getting a pretty darn fair shake here.
All right, good. Good news that we don't have to worry about that this weekend, or at least for the time being. Scotty Scheffler is going off here as the favorite. He will not tee off now until 1:12 Eastern, along with Xander and Rory. What a grouping there. 4-1 to win the Masters. No golfer has been this high of a favorite since Tiger Woods in 2019. And I would probably say Brady's got a pretty good shot to win. As you said on the show a couple days ago, the chalk usually comes in at the Masters.
Absolutely. And, it goes into the thinking of how you can whittle down this field and really determine how many guys actually have a shot to win this thing. Obviously, there are 89 players in the field. That includes Jose Maria Olazabal and Vijay Singh and Mike Weir, and it includes amateurs, and it includes debutantes who, won a tournament on the PGA Tour. Hats off to them, but they probably aren't certainly ranked in the top 50 in the world. I mean, you talk about a guy like Grayson Murray that was 500-1 to win the Sony Open. Is he going to win the Masters? Probably not. So pretty soon you've whittled down this field to maybe 40 or 50 guys. And some people will tell you that there's only 20 guys that can win this tournament. So let's say it's somewhere between 20 and 40 guys that have a realistic shot to win this event. That makes it not surprising that a guy like Scotty Scheffler is so short. So, Scheffler's price is not surprising because he truly is the best player in the world. And then you go down from there and, you've got the next 10 guys on the board, Rory McIlroy, Jon Rahm, Hideki Matsuyama. You got to pick one of those guys there. Nobody's probably going, when you whittle it down to that, let's say top 30 guys, there's not a whole lot of guys in that window on the odds board that are going to be much higher than 40-1. So I think that's probably part of the reason that this does become a very chalky tournament, because such a small portion of the field has a realistic chance to win it. And that small portion of the field is the top end of the odds board.
Yeah, and a lot of what you've done, Brady, is really interesting going into the weekend, because a lot of the players that you like are not in that 4-1, 5-1 range. You're taking some stabs here, some shots at some other players, and needless to say, they're in the very high range. And I know that the other thing we talked about here on the show is beyond Xander, you like a lot of these players also to finish inside the top 20. So it's a nice tight card that if you can nail, 60% of these, you're winning some plus money, I noticed as well on some of these players.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've got 2 longer shots in Tony Finau and Shane Lowry, who I think their price is a little bit inflated. Again, if you narrow that field down to 30 or 40 guys and you're getting Shane Lowry and Tony Finau at 50, 60, 70-1, that's a pretty darn good price. But other than that, I was at, 30-1 or less. So, I in the long run, I went pretty chalky as well. But you're right. I love to play the top 20s because I think it gives you obviously that much more wider range to be right. You don't have to pick just the one guy who's going to cash money for you, but you've got a chance of 20 positions on the leaderboard, maybe even more so than that. If ties are included in your winning bets, you have to check your sports book for that. But if I land on these guys to win the golf tournament, I think they also obviously have an extremely good chance to finish top 20. Now, Xander, I placed a bet for top 10 because I think that's a very good play. The rest of the guys I bet to finish top 20. It's kind of like an underdog in a football game, Craig. If you're betting the underdog getting 4.5 points, you probably think that underdog has a good chance to win it outright, correct? So the 4.5 points equates to betting them top 20. The sprinkle on the outright equates to them winning the football game outright. So it's similar thinking for me. I don't necessarily like to play certain guys in the outright market and then another 3 or 4 guys in the top 20. I hone in on 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 guys that I think can win the golf tournament, and I'm also going to play them in the finish position market.
Agreed. Okay, so when people are trying to bet on Tiger Woods, any kind of opportunity they can this week, FanDuel is telling you you're going to pay the price here. Juice on make the cut, juice on miss the cut. And honestly, I mean, not even crazy odds to win the Masters. I mean, the odds makers have to protect themselves. I get it. Do you have a lean as to what you think ends up happening with Tiger Woods here? Because certainly it's kind of just even money here, although you're paying minus 118 to have Tiger go into Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, that's a pretty crazy price. I've seen out here in Las Vegas as high as plus 130 to make the cut. And a couple things on Tiger. First of all, I know at Mandalay Bay, a BetMGM property out here in Las Vegas, this would be the biggest hit they would ever take in the world of golf betting ever if Tiger were to win. And he's only accounting for 5% of the handle, but there are so many $20, $50, $100 bets for recreational bettors that want to have a rooting interest on Tiger Woods at 125 to 1. That is an astronomical liability that they are experiencing on Tiger Woods. And funny enough, other books have a tremendous liability on Vijay Singh and Phil Mickelson because they don't have, they might have $50 on Vijay Singh at 5,000 to 1. That's a big liability. So it's kind of funny how the books have worked out in terms of liability here on some of these massive long shots. Now, the sharp side has been Tiger to miss the cut and also Mickelson to beat Tiger in a head-to-head matchup. But with Tiger to make the cut, now at plus 130, that's probably not a bad time to go the other direction. You're trying to really, thread the needle here with people making or missing the cut. There's going to be about 60 guys that make it to the weekend and only 89 in the field. So you've got to find a very slim margin there for Tiger to make or to miss.
All right. Well, Brady, enjoy the weekend. Thanks again for coming on NewsWire. We'll catch up again and talk about who won. Thanks.
All right. Enjoy it, Craig. Thank you.
We'll have the live leaderboard from Augusta next.
Boy, if you passed him up as a Heisman Trophy winner and he lights the league on fire like C.J. Stroud over a Bryce Young, you might not make it as a head coach or in your regime here. I just don't think they can pass over Daniels at number 2.
He's sitting at 5.8 goals saved above average. He has been standing on top of his head for this team, but defense has to help him out a little bit. The Red Wings defense comes alive just a bit. I think that they're definitely going to punch their card.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Victor Hovland right now can probably hit it right where he's looking on the range. But the problem is when you get out to a golf course, especially like Augusta National, it's a big, big picture. You can see every shot in the world, but the targets are really, really small.
I feel like whoever we pick is going to win. I feel like we have the power to choose the winner of this tournament.
I know. I'm surprised more guys haven't reached out.
And they might, and they probably will.
Only on SportsGrid.
89-87, 0.6 seconds remaining. Big drama here in this game. Always frustrating when your Final Four parlay and bracket gets busted, but here we go. I'm done.
Look what he is now. He's on FanDuel, plus 120. Almost even money to win the tournament. So you actually, if you did get him at plus 260, you got a pretty good, better investment than you had before. Just saying.
Sports Rage Late Night, only on SportsGrid.
Your gut says Miami is going to win, and you should take the over. Your gut also said your NFT selfies would only go up in value. They didn't. But your head is on SportsGrid and knows the QB is in concussion protocol. The backup has a 45 QBR against the zone coverage. The New York D has the most sacks in the league. So yeah, trust your head. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Welcome back to NewsWire here on SportsGrid. As we end the show, thought we would be giving you some massive Masters updates, but they've only been playing for about an hour or so. So no player, I don't think, that is even halfway done through their round. Not many have teed off, but here's the leaderboard. Danny Willett through 4 is 2 under. Eric Van Rooyen through 6, 2 under. Taylor Moore, 1 under. Yeah, not much happening, folks. But there it is for those of you who have like props for the first day of the Masters. Maybe that will help with your day. But here's what will help you more. Here are some of the key tee times for some of the main players that are going to tee off later. Fitzpatrick, Rahm, and Dunlap at 1. Scotty Scheffler, Xander, Rory McIlroy, 1:12. Cam Smith, Wyndham Clark, Victor Hovland, 1:24 p.m. 3:42. Adam Scott, Sam Burns, Cam Young. 3:54 is Tiger Woods with Jason Day and Max Homa. 4:06 p.m. Eastern is Brian Arma, Bruce Koepka, and Tom Kim, among others. And naturally, 3 o'clock Eastern today, we tee off with Pharrell Coast to Coast. So he will have the live leaderboard with more substantial updates for you. And then we'll be back tomorrow morning to recap day 1 of the Masters at 11 a.m. right here on our next edition of NewsWire on SportsGrid. Also want to thank our guests on the program today, Jim Gazzale from Legal Sports Report. Of course, in addition to Kyle Irving from Sporting News, the sports professor Rick Haro, and of course, Brady Kannon of SportsGrid, our associate producer Frank, and our producer Michael Cohen. I'm Craig Mish. I'll be back with you tomorrow for our next edition of NewsWire at 11 a.m. Eastern, and we'll update everything going on because we're going to have a lot of info on the NBA playoffs. They're coming to the end of the NBA season, so these matchups should be coming in. We'll also talk about the weekend of baseball coming up and the updates on Thursday afternoon baseball as well, speaking of which some games under some rain delay issues, the Reds, the Brewers, the Mets, the Braves. So those of you looking at afternoon baseball, you could be looking at some evening baseball as well. Bad weather all around the country. Have a great rest of your day. Enjoy our programming here on SportsGrid, and I'll see you tomorrow morning for our next edition of NewsWire exclusively here on SportsGrid. See you then.